welcome to Cop Talk. Welcome to 2016. We have a special guest with us, Karen Aroesty of the Anti-Defamation League. Welcome.
Thank you.
Bob Cohn. I think you've seen him once or twice before. We're going to hit some of the major stories that are going on and other opinions that people have. Let's get started. So let's talk first about how fear and xenophobia are being used in this current presidential campaign and election. Karen, what's your personal take and ADL's take on this?
My personal take is that I'm waiting for Donald Trump to come and say it's all been one big punchline and that it's not real. And you all got sucked in and it's all really going to be over. Now we can get on with the grown-ups. I think ADL has expressed publicly a great deal of concern that the rhetoric has just been over the top, and that the bias issues are heavily out there. Mm-hmm. Frankly, on the other side of it, though, I think what you've seen, certainly in the St. Louis area and in other parts of the country, is intentional efforts by interfaith groups to support the Muslim community, to respond to some of the bias incidents and actual hate crime incidents that have occurred in mosques around the country, and to stomp on some of that more troubling conversation.
Is that the way out of it, Bob, or are there other ways too?
I think that's certainly an important component of it, and I also just think if this had been presented as a script for a Hollywood movie, it would have been rejected as being completely unlikely. Yeah. And yet, I think even Trump himself must be surprised now in comparison to how he felt starting out. Yeah. And I think both of his feet are well down his throat, and eventually there won't be a Heimlich maneuver that can save him.
Let's move over to Israel. So there's this bill working its way through Knesset right now that would require NGOs, or non-governmental organizations, most of which we call nonprofits in this country, to declare funding from foreign countries. The U.S. and others are afraid that this will have a chilling effect on NGOs. Karen, what are your thoughts?
It had a chilling effect when Russia did it, when Moscow did it, 6 or 8 years ago. And it really took a lot of folks that had the capacity to have a presence in a place where they really wanted to be enmeshed in the culture to go away.
Is this political? Is this a right-wing move against left-wing organization?
You know what? NGOs come in all shapes and sizes and all ranges of political influence. So I can't say that I know for a fact that it has it's going to have a political impact.
I mean, I think the preponderance of the NGOs tend to drift
left. Center.
Yeah, so that was my question. Bob, what about you?
I think the optics are bad either way. Yeah. I think Israel has historically prided itself on being the only open society in the entire Middle East, and they feed that negative narrative by doing stuff like this, even if there's some legitimate concerns. I think they can track the activities of these organizations without requiring them to go through this.
But we've seen the Israelis pull center right when there's a sense of instability and insecurity, and I think they're feeling that a lot right now on a lot of levels. So it would make sense that political influence would come to the fore.
Karen, so let's switch back to Missouri. So looking at our wondrous Jefferson City, what are maybe the top couple issues from your and ADL's perspective about the coming legislative session?
I think that the fear that we usually have in a presidential election year, that the legislature, influenced by evangelical politics, is going to force us into trying to defend against a number of faith-based bills, because in an effort to pull out the religious base to vote for the right of center. Right. We're going to be dealing with that.
What's one bill that might be the most prominent or sticking out in your mind? Anything come to mind in particular?
Nothing comes to mind right now, because I was sort of looking at the 10th year also of bills against voter ID. And that's something that we're going to see a whole coalition of people dealing with. I am disturbed about two bills in particular that have been introduced to respond to issues out of Ferguson on racial profiling, both of which I think unfortunately have zero chance of getting through. And the reason why that dismays me is that I'd really like to see legislation on this issue be successful and not be political. We've been trying to work on that for some years and have been hampered in that regard. I don't see us being successful this year either.
Going back to that voter ID, Bob, I found it kind of humorous that a lot of folks at the Missouri level and in other states were complaining about the threats of the federal real ID, and imposing requirements on Missouri for identification in order to use, airports and other federal facilities at the same time that they're opposing, the voter ID.
That was
pushing the voter ID.
Just like Trump saying that crews being born in Canada is an issue, but people can't claim citizenship under the 14th Amendment.
You want the legislature to make sense?
Bob, let's talk briefly about Syria, which actually was characterized for a long time as a middle-income country by world standards. and now we've seen 250,000 die and almost 500,000 who can't get food and medicine. Do you see any way out to this thing at all?
I really am filled with despair about it, and the scenes out of that city that is under siege, that it was cut off by the Syrians, people literally starving to death, and finally some aid is getting through. 250,000, and plus the waves of migrants, the incident that took place in Cologne. Again, like the old song said, we sure could use a little good news today.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that this effort in Geneva to have some kind of a settlement that would at least stabilize the status quo and allow, because Syria, even under the Assad, father and son, was relatively stable and relatively protective of its minorities. ISIS, on the other hand, is vicious and not even close.
Karen?
I worry that people not in the region really don't understand how acutely unstable the Middle East is right now, and how when you look at the influence of the Russians in Syrian politics, and you look at what the United States is trying to do with ISIS, and everything else with the Saudis now, and the Iranians, and how some of the other members of the Arab League have lined up with the Saudis against the Iranians, the issues that the Israelis have with the Iranians, it's a powder keg for something terrible. And I fear, though, that with American politics being the way it is, and with the way people are living their lives now here, which is to say, in kind of an insular way.
I also think, I'm sorry.
It's just that I feel like people don't realize how much of a difficulty.
I also think things can get to a scope and a magnitude where it's hard for people to process, and they'd rather look away than not look away.
Right.
I mean, in Israel, yes, I think you find plenty of people saying there's anti-Semitism or there's anti-Palestinian, feeling on either side, but the events that are happening, are individuals, and it's happening on the street and they're named in the paper.
And it's consistent.
And then you have Syria where nobody knows who's being killed.
Right.
They're just not even names.
Nameless faces.
And it's just like it's easy for people to just kind of pay no attention.
I want to tune out. I was more interested in the Golden Globes than I was in the latest efforts of this Turkish president.
Yeah, and while we could talk about that today, we're not going to talk about that today. So I'll ask you an equally inane subject. Do either of you care if St. Louis has an NFL team or a new stadium?
Very interesting. Part of me doesn't care. On the other hand, being able to say we're in an NFL city, I feel badly for the players and for the fans. I wish the energy that went into getting $1 billion plan put together, as defective as it is, would be put into just one section. Could take care of all the homeless for several generations.
Or think about the recommendations in the Ferguson report, right?
They could be implemented.
But that's not always the way it works. I mean, as we know. I mean, first of all, there are lots of competing interests at a civic level. And second of all, simply because the money would be spent on a stadium doesn't necessarily mean, if it weren't spent on a stadium, that it would be spent on these other things.
No, and you've got to acknowledge that the $1 billion, however it's spent, is going to have a positive economic impact on the community if this thing moves forward. And so I really don't care about football, but I do care about innovative ways that St. Louis can engage in lifting itself up, because I think we've been battered enough as a region that anything positive that we can do is a real positive. But whether it's football or whether it's soccer or whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter to me.
Finally, we just honored the retirement of Batya Abramson Goldstein as the outgoing JCRC head, and welcome her successor, Rory Picker-Nice. You've both been hugely involved in relationships between the Jewish community and the greater community. What do you think are some of the significant issues we face right now in ensuring positive community relationships between the Jewish and the broader communities, Karen?
I will tell you what my mantra has been, and will be for a while, is that I am very concerned about Black-Jewish relations in the community. I think the Jewish community has taken for granted its bona fides over the last 50 or 60 years in a post-civil rights era about its allyship with the Black community, and I think the moving target that has been created by Ferguson in this area is something we have to be more intentional about. I don't think we have the luxury of saying, we were with you then, we're with you now. I think we have to have...
We're 2 generations removed from people who were around at that time.
And frankly, we have to be more, and this is my favorite word nowadays, intentional about understanding and being able to speak in a vulnerable way about our whiteness. And until we can do that on a comprehensive level with folks who are active in anti-racism work now, whether you want to call it the Black Lives Matter movement or something else, we have to be intentional, and I'm afraid we're not doing that in the comprehensive way I think we need.
You get the final word, buddy.
We also have to be intellectually honest, even in discussing as we editorial criticize the Black Lives Matter Hands Up faction for demonizing Rabbi Susan Talvey of all things. We have to be able to be brave enough to call things as they are and not as we would hope them to be. And Bacha says for her whole career, and when people came to that farewell event, it was like a who's who, and Rory's going to be building on quite a good 16-year legacy that she helped establish.
Thank you.
One of the things, by the way, I mean, that what Bacha did over that 26 years was about people. And in the end, that's what it's going to be about. It's going to be about those person-to-person relationships that are going to end up moving the needle. She did that so well over so long.
And in addition to some of the other challenges that I have with the Ferguson report, one thing you can't do is shortcut the time sitting one-on-one, listening, dialoguing, having those bridge building conversations.
Absolutely.
And people think they can come in and imprint, some solution without that amount of work. And I know that's a lot of what you do, and I know it's what you've done with the civil rights group in the county, which you serve on as well. And there's no way. So it just takes time and insistence, and the good word you used, intentionality. That's all the time we got. Have a good 2016. I know it doesn't sound like that with all the issues we have, but I'm sure we'll have more to talk about. Be well and take care.